All right. So last week we covered the topic of should you sell your house for sale by owner? This week we're going to take a quick look at a different type of listing, and that is the expired listing. And in 2022, you might be thinking, how the heck does a listing expire? Since everything is selling, but we're here to talk a little bit about why you might see a listing expire in 2022. So, Pete, what's going on, man?
What's going on, brother?
Not too much. I'm excited to dive into this topic because I think it is something that I think we should definitely, define what an expired listing is for everyone listening. But in 2022, us as realtors and even the consumer listening to this might be thinking like, how does a listing expire? So I guess let's start it off. What is an expired listing, man?
Yeah, so I mean, an expired listing is essentially a listing that was on the market for the term of the agreement and didn't sell for one reason or another. Um, so yeah, although it's true, we're not seeing as many as we sometimes see. That is what an expired listing is, and sometimes it still happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's what makes it kind of like a startling thing to think of. Like, how could a listing expire when, again, everything is selling, right? So let's dive right into it. Like, what is a reason why in a market that is moving and is so extremely pivoted towards the sellers, why would a listing expire?
So I mean, there's really a couple of reasons. The first one is always going to go to price, right? The first thing we're going to look at and say, is this property priced correctly for this market, or any market that you're in? Um, and some people may say, well, it's not that it's overpriced; it's that it's on a busy road, or the bedrooms aren't right, or the layout isn't any good. But the reality is, if that's the case, then the price needs to reflect that. So it does always, to some degree, come back to price. But there are also other circumstances, right? Sometimes a job transfer could be going in and the sellers just decide they're not going to move anymore, right? And the house will sit on the market for its, not on the market, we'll withdraw it from the market. And then, once that term is over, it could show up as an expired listing. I mean, those are really the main reasons I see homes expire. I mean, how about you? Am I missing anything on that?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? Because in any market, I'm glad you brought up the fact that like price can pretty much overcome what are, on the surface level heard as like the objections, right? Like, I mean, certainly you do get feedback as a listing agent, like, hey, we just think that, the house is priced too high. But usually what you're hearing people say about a listing, about a home is, hey, the condition isn't that great. Hey, it needs a lot more updates than we expected. Hey, it's on a busy road. But all of those do relate back to the price, right? Price can overcome many of the objections that you're going to face as a seller. But I do think in 2022, even when we see fewer listings expiring, even over the last 2 years, right? I think the one thing that I have seen a little bit of is all of a sudden, sellers are hearing that the market is just increasing, right? Values are going up. Everything is selling. So you do have these situations where the seller gets it in their mind that like there is no price that's going to drive away a buyer, right? You're going to see a listing and somebody's going to buy it. But there's still, buyers are still tuned in to what is a good value and what isn't a good value. It just happens to be that in most cases, there's more demand than, supply. So that drives the prices up. But if you start way out of scale, buyers are going to be like, well, what's with that? Like, we're not going to place an offer on that home. It's way too expensive. Like, it's not a value. So I think that holds true no matter what kind of market you're in, is you've got to start by pricing your listing correctly.
Yeah, and I think what we're starting to see a little bit, not a ton of, because there just truly aren't a lot of homes on the market right now. But I think what we've seen a little bit of, and what we'll see in the not so distant future, is right. Like, so a home that's listed for $399 sells for $475, right? So now fast forward a month, and now that seller sees that house sold for $475 when and then what they'll do is they'll list the home for sale at $475. that is not a winning strategy, right? Because it was the $399 list price that caused it to go up to $475. It makes sense why, a seller or an agent would look at that and say, well, if this house sold for $475 and I have the same house that I'm selling, we should list it at $475. But what they miss on is that it was the demand, it was that auction kind of bidding war that brought it up to $475. So you're still, in that situation, the model is pretty much set, right? Listed at $399, you should get close to, maybe more than $475. Maybe you go up at $425. But I think, kind of bringing it back down is it does a lot of times come to price. Also, access to the home can be something that can be a challenge, right? We've seen it with a lot of like rental properties or multifamily properties where the tenant isn't really cooperating and letting people in to see the house. Again, you could overcome that with a price that is going to allow people to say it's a no-brainer at this number. I don't even need to see it. But you're going to be leaving money on the table. So you certainly want to try something like that, right? You want to do your best to allow people to get in. There's different strategies that you and I use to kind of get around that. But I think access to the property and, agent response time and just kind of how is the agent setting up showings, right? Because the more people you have coming into that property, the more exposure, the higher the value or the higher the price it's going to sell at. So if you don't have a strategy in place to get as many people in as painlessly for the seller, one thing we didn't really talk about why a property could expire is because a seller has an expectation of 500,000, but the offers they're only getting in are 450. So it still comes back to price, but you have to look back and say, okay, am I only getting 450 because that's what my home is truly worth? Or were some of those other things, were maybe communication not great? Maybe the marketing needs to be improved. Maybe not enough people knew the house was for sale. Maybe the photos are terrible. We've seen it all, right? In our time in this business. So those are just a couple other things that could cause a home to expire.
Yeah. And so I think that kind of leads us to pivoting towards like, all right, so if you're a seller and let's say you haven't gotten an offer and you're 30 days on market, which in this market is a long time, and you're starting to wonder, like, what should I be doing to fix this problem? Or you happen to be the seller that has an expired listing, you're out of that listing term and now you're wondering, like, what is my next step? I think the easy path there is clearly reduce your price, right? Reflect on what happened. Were there showings? Were there no showings? Did you get offers? Did you get no offers? You've got to start looking at those questions. But then based on that information, you've got to sit back and reflect and say, well, with that knowledge at hand, like, what do I need to correct here? Right. And again, price is always going to be the simple solution. But what I think we both like to do is also talk to the seller about, like, that feedback was very real, right? When someone said, hey, I wasn't looking to have to, renovate the kitchen. You can't change the location, right? If road is an issue and it's a busy road, and that was your main feedback, why you didn't get the offer you expected, and now you're sitting on an expired listing. Sorry, you can't change the location of your house. That's why they say in real estate, location, location, location. But there are usually a lot of things that a seller can do to take action on it, right? And it doesn't mean you've got to go hire a contractor to gut reno the kitchen. But if you were hearing that your kitchen was tired, like, is there a logical and price savvy way to give that a little refresher, right? Paint the cabinets, add some new hardware. Was it just, I've had listings in the past where feedback was the home felt small and we simply just staged it differently, reshot the photos, got rid of, a couple big oversized pieces of furniture, or, just looked at, like, hey, when people first walk in the door, do they feel like, boom, they're getting slapped right in the face with something that they got to, like, walk around and move around to get into the home? You want to try and eliminate those things so that people all of a sudden walk into the same exact house and now it doesn't feel small anymore. So those are just off the top of my head, a couple things that, like, strike me as staging and smart, price savvy ways to improve, do little home improvements. What about you? Anything that I, left out there?
I mean, I just think that the first thing you have to do is evaluate if you're working with a professional or the right professional, right? I think
good.
I mean, because throughout the process, like by the time, most of our listings are 6 months, right? If you've been on the market for 6 months and you truly don't have any idea why your home's not selling, I would probably say maybe you weren't working with the true professional, because a true professional is going to have given you that advice before you even hit the market and
Yeah.
let you know some of the objections and struggles from what we see every single day. So it shouldn't be a surprise. Um, and then if you kind of don't have any feedback, you weren't really hearing anything back, then that's another sign that you're not working with a true professional. So with that being said, if you are working with a true professional and you do know you are getting that feedback and you are getting some of those things, I think then it's kind of a matter of reevaluating your motivation and deciding, like, what is most important to me? Is it most important to me to get another $20,000 or $30,000 out of this house? Or is it most important for, to get to a bigger or a smaller house or a different location? Because you just may not be ready, right? That's something that I think is probably important too. And again, if you don't feel like you have a professional, or if they haven't talked to you about some of the things we just mentioned, then you need to give us a call, either myself or Scott, because we would be happy to have that conversation with you. But maybe you're not in this area. You need to find yourself a professional who's going to really walk you through that whole process and say, okay, this is what we're seeing. These are the numbers. These are some of the objections you had. I mean, I have talked to clients who tried to sell their house and they ended up expiring. And I said, well, what was the main reason? I don't know. My agent didn't tell me. That's a problem. That's a problem.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, man, because I will say, like, in the past, when I've called expired listings, right, soliciting the opportunity for me to maybe get in there and talk to them about something they could do different. When I would go through those lists, I would occasionally come across like a great agent that had a listing expire, and 9.5 times out of 10, what I would actually do in that situation, I would call that agent just out of like mutual respect in this market, or in any market, to just be like, hey, Pete, like, I saw your awesome listing at 123 Main Street expired. Like, talk to me. What the heck happened there? And usually it did fall back on like, hey, like, it was a motivation thing, or hey, circumstances didn't allow us to do XYZ. I'm already in conversation with the sellers about what we're going to do to correct it. But most of the times you would get that feedback when you were just calling the sellers. If I didn't recognize the agent's name, I'm going to call the seller because, hey, I got to get direct to the source and figure this out. And a lot of times it was simply like, hey, like, I don't know, we put the house on the market 6 months ago and I just never really heard much anything from my agent. I'm like,
yep, you hear that. You hear that so much. And that's why we call, because we want to help, because we know that there's somebody who is trying to get to a different location or trying to, change their life for the better. And they, in some cases, haven't had the greatest experience. And if you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, it's possible that you just think, okay, this is what real estate agents do. It's not going to be any different with the next person. But we know that we've seen different results with a different agent after a property's expired.
yeah. And it's like what we've said in the past too, is that, like, I think buying and selling is a collaborative experience. We are here as the agent, not to like be the star of the show and make everything happen magically. We're here to guide you, like give you the advice that you need so that you can get the outcome you're seeking. So that works whether you're, buying a home or selling a home. And I think, finding the right guide is super important.
Yeah, because that person can also guide you to the decision where you're like, I'm not ready right now, or no, it's not enough for me to move. And that's okay. That's fine. But if you are in a position where you really were trying to get somewhere else and you couldn't do it, I'd probably say my biggest piece of advice would be talk to a true professional.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up this week's episode. Get out there, talk to a real professional. And until next week, I'm Scott.
And I'm Pete, guys. Have a great day. Be sure to smash that like button, give us a comment, shoot us a message if you'd like us to do another video in the future that we haven't covered, and have an awesome day.